I want to move on to further reinforce this point. You may have heard of the relationship between Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Shimon ben Lakish, Reish Lakish. If you haven't, then you're in for a pleasant story here. I urge you to take a look in Masechet Bava Metzia, page Pei Daled Amud Aleph, 84. Wait, okay, 84a. 84a. Okay. Take a look in Masechet Bava Metzia. The page itself is a very funny page. It's a funny page because there are a lot of really strange, I'd almost call them ribald stories on the daf. It's one of these things that the censors of the Talmud probably wish they had gotten rid of, but did not. And since it's in there, I urge you to take a look at it. It's very funny. It talks about, for example, two Tanaim, Rav Papa and Rabbi Eliezer, who was the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and it tells how fat they were. And it basically says that they were so fat that a Roman matron came over to them and said, "I don't believe your kids are your kids because you're too fat to have sex." And their response was, "Well, if you think we're fat, you should take a look at our our penises." So it's like a very strange text.
Never mind.
Okay. And this is in the Gemara, so I'm perfectly legitimated in citing this. It refers to Rabbi Yochanan. It says Rabbi Yochanan was the most beautiful looking man of his generation. And it explains how beautiful he was, and it uses all sorts of examples. And it says that Rabbi Yochanan, and I'm reading this from the text, Rabbi Yochanan used to go and sit at the gates of the mikvah. When the daughters of Israel left the bath, he said, "Let them look upon me, that they may bear sons as beautiful and as learned as I am." So, this is a strange dude, okay? I mean, nowadays, if the guy was hanging outside the mikvah, you would call the SVU and say there's a stalker at the mikvah. But here he's like priding himself in hanging out while the women come out of the mikvah. This is before you had cameras in closets. Freundel were smart. He would have used this as a defense, but be that as it may. Rabbi Yochanan, who was the last of the Tanaim and the first of the Amoraim, the story goes that one day Rabbi Yochanan was bathing in the Jordan. And I'm reading this, and along came Reish Lakish, Shimon ben Lakish, and saw him from the back.
Yes.
And saw his long hair. It doesn't quite go into this.
Yeah.
But it says, he saw him, and he jumped into the Jordan after him. And Rabbi Yochanan says to him, and the line in the Gemara is, Chelech le'oraita, which translates as, your strength should be for the Torah. And Reish Lakish responds to him, well, your beauty should be for women. Okay? It's like so you're already starting off this relationship of, like a nice comic routine bantering between them. And Rabbi Yochanan says, I'll tell you what, if you repent, which apparently is a comment on his lifestyle, because according to some sources, he was either a gladiator or he procured gladiators for the arena, or possibly he was a highwayman. We're not quite sure what it is. It doesn't say specifically. There's a statement later on which you'll hear them argue, and he says, if you will repent, I will give you my sister in marriage, who is more beautiful than I.
Yeah.
Okay. So Reish Lakish takes the challenge. He undertook the repentance, and there's a line which we don't quite understand. Then he wished to return and collect his weapons, but he could not. Okay, we don't quite know what that means, but essentially, once he became Jewish, he was ostracized from his previous profession or path, or whatever you call it, way of making a living. And essentially, he burned all his bridges by becoming, by doing tshuva and becoming a disciple of Rabbi Yochanan. So what happened? Subsequently, Rabbi Yochanan taught him Torah, taught him Tanakh, taught him Mishnah, and made him into a great man. Okay, so Reish Lakish became the foil for Rabbi Yochanan, that whenever Rabbi Yochanan had a halacha, that Reish Lakish would engage him in banter and try to have him perfect what the halacha is. And if you go through the Gemara, you see there are countless discussions, disputes, good word, countless disputes between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish over very minuscule and very detailed aspects of halacha. And the Gemara doesn't necessarily resolve the disputes. It just says, Rabbi Yochanan says this, Reish Lakish says this, and it goes on throughout the Gemara. So what happens? The story continues. One day, there was a dispute in the schoolhouse relating a sword, knife, dagger, spear, handsaw, and scythe. At which stage in their manufacturing do they become unclean? In other words, according to the halacha, when do they become unclean? When you finish making them. But the question was, when do you finish making them? When is a sword a sword? When is a knife a knife? When is a plow a handsaw? When is a handsaw a handsaw? So Rabbi Yochanan ruled that a sword or a weapon or an implement is considered finished when it's finally tempered in the furnace. When you do that final hammer blow and you make it into the form of a saw, that's when it's finished. Or you make it into the form of a spear, that's when it's finished. Reish Lakish said, no, it's not finished until you stick it in water. And that's the final piece that you need to do in order to temper it, or whatever the actual word is, when you stick it in the water. What does Rabbi Yochanan say? Rabbi Yochanan gets very snitty or snarky. And Rabbi Yochanan says to him, well, a robber understands his trade, which means either that he was saying that he was a robber, or he's just using a phrase that's kind of nasty. That's a nasty phrase. Yeah. Okay, but either way, it's a very snarky statement that Yochanan makes to Reish Lakish. And Reish Lakish becomes offended. Reish Lakish says, how have you benefited me? In my previous profession, I was called a master. And here, you're putting me down. You wanted to make me into a master, but now you're turning me into, into your little whipping boy. What have you benefited me? How have you helped me in my profession? I thought I was making a move up. At very least, I was making a lateral move, and now you're putting me down. So Rabbi Yochanan says, well, I brought you under the wings of the Shekhinah. But that didn't wash with Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish was offended. And he walked out of the Beit Midrash broigus, which left Rabbi Yochanan broigus. And Reish Lakish was so upset that he became ill. He became seriously ill. And his wife, that is Rabbi Yochanan's sister, came to plead with Rabbi Yochanan and said, please, pray for my husband, bring him back into your fold, apologize to him, because you've made him physically ill by insulting him. And she says, for the sake of my son, please bring him back. To which Rabbi Yochanan's answer is from the Pasuk. He says, leave fatherless children, I will preserve them alive. Hashem will take care of your kids. And she says, well, at least at least pray for him and bring him back for my sake. I don't want to be a widow. And he says, essentially, don't worry, God takes care of widows.
It's a real pity.
Well, he is a snarky kind of guy. Okay? At which point, Reish Lakish dies. And after Reish Lakish dies, Rabbi Yochanan falls into a deep depression.
Because he didn't,
Okay?
he didn't help.
So you don't get these stories in general. You read the text, you find some pretty amazing things. So after Rabbi Yochanan falls into a deep depression, the Chachamim said, you know what? Rabbi Yochanan is a brilliant scholar. We can't have a depressed scholar teaching every time he comes into class. He's like, he's falling apart at the seams. And by the way, just to give you an idea of Rabbi Yochanan's depression, Rabbi Yochanan had 10 sons, and I think all of them died.
Yeah, I know.
Okay,
Yeah,
and so it's not he didn't come by his depression. I should say he came by his depression honestly.
After Reish Lakish?
I'm not sure whether before or after. I'm presuming after. And he used to walk around, according to the Gemara, it doesn't mention it here. He used to walk around with one of the teeth, one of the baby teeth of his youngest son, as a memento of his youngest son. And he used to say, this is the last remaining bone of my last remaining son. Okay, so again, it's not.
What is the term used for being depressed in the?
I don't remember. I'll have to check. I don't know. I think dikaon is a modern word.
No,
I don't know if they said ruach ra'ah. I don't know. I'll have to check.
What was it, 84?
Depression.
84.
84A, but I don't know what it is.
In Baba.
Baba Metzia.
Depression used to be called melancholy.
Yes,
It's a
yeah.
good question.
Yeah.
If you don't find it, I'll check it out. But basically, he just couldn't function anymore.
But there was another argument if he's walking around with the tooth,
Yeah.
that meant that the child had survived for a longer period of time because the baby.
Right. At least to have a baby tooth that you can hold on to.
Yeah.
So the Chachamim said, listen, we've got to do something. We've got to do something to get him out of his depression. Let's get another Chacham to sit with him, like Reish Lakish,
Yeah.
to replace Reish Lakish, so that at least he'll have a colleague to sort of play off. So what happened? So they went and they found Elazar ben Pedat, who was apparently one of the bright young stars of his generation. And they brought him in front of Rabbi Yochanan. Every time Rabbi Yochanan talked, and every time Rabbi Yochanan gave a halacha, so Elazar ben Pedat would say, yes, there's a braita that supports what you say.
But. Yeah.
Okay? So he'd make a halacha, he'd say a halacha, and Elazar ben Pedat would pipe in and say, yes, then there's a braita that says the same thing that you do. At which point, Rabbi Yochanan goes into a fit of anger. And he says, are you the son of Lakish?
Oh.
When I stated a halacha, the son of Lakish would raise 24 objections, to which I gave 24 answers, which consequently led to a better comprehension of the law. And all you're telling me is there's a brisa that says the same thing that I do. What, you don't think I know the brisa? And then he tore his garments, and he said, oh, you found it?
I found it in the English.
Okay.
Rabbi Yochanan grieved after him considerably.
Okay. Let's see.
Yeah, but that he was
G,
different.
okay. Okay, it says Havaka mitzta'er.
I'm sorry.
Mitzta'er.
Yeah. Mitztaer.
you know,
So-
like
And he was
sorrow,
down.
he was sorrowful, he was sorrowful. So that would be like your word melancholy.
Yes.
That would be like melancholy, so he was sorrowful, okay?
Yeah, that's
Mitztaer.
melancholy, is what you said, it's
Okay.
melancholy.
So basically, it's so the Gemara says,
Thank you.
thank you very much. So the Gemara says that Reish Lakish tore his clothes, and he said, "Oh, you know, where are you, the son of Lakish? Where are you, the son of Lakish?" That's Shimon ben Lakish. And at that point, he also fell into a very deep illness, and then he also died.
Was it the water?
No, it was you know, melancholy.
No, that was just.
Okay, maybe it was the water, I don't know. Okay, so what is this telling us? I think part of what this message is a, I won't say a vindication, but at least a support for what Jonathan Sachs is saying. Okay, the whole, what is the point of machloket l'shem shamayim? It's when people argue with each other over an issue like this. The argument builds each person. It lets people see different alternatives. In effect, by Reish Lakish arguing with Rabbi Yochanan, it's not Rabbi Yochanan sitting there and saying, you know, don't bother me, or leave me alone, or why should I care what you think? It's, let me take that into consideration and see if I can polish what I'm saying to make what I'm saying clearer, or maybe see from a different perspective, or find out something else, or learn something else. I don't need someone to tell me, oh yeah, you're right.
Well, oh yeah, you're wrong.
Well, oh yeah, you're wrong, but why? Why am I wrong? And if I give you a reason that you're wrong, and then you say, well, let's look at it from another perspective.
But Rabbi Sachs did that deliberately. He deliberately said and wrote in order to provoke and for people to think.
Think so?
And he wrote that, didn't he?
Okay, could be. I don't know. But inherent in Judaism is what I use, the phrase that I used before, trying to search for the transcendent truth. The transcendent truth incorporates everything. Okay? The halacha that we say is according to Hillel today may be one day according to Shammai. Not that one is right and one is wrong, but one works now and maybe it'll work differently in another setting, in another environment. And I always use,
Except that
yeah,
what's going on in the Shammai Hillel, it's that there has become a symbolism of right and wrong,
yeah,
and Hillel is always right, and Shammai is always wrong,
okay.
and we just keep the remembrance of Shammai for what was wrong, but we don't recognize him.
That's correct. That's correct. And that's why I mentioned in my note, the Mishnah does not say a machloket l'shem shamayim. It doesn't cite the machloket of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. It refers to Hillel and Shammai. What's the difference between Hillel and Shammai and Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai? Why doesn't the Mishnah refer to Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai? And I think this is actually what Natana was alluding to, even though you didn't say it. There's a major difference between Hillel and Shammai and the disciples of Hillel and Shammai.
Yeah.
Because when Hillel and Shammai argued as colleagues. What was the job description of Hillel and what was the job description of Shammai?
Hillel was a lit.
Yeah, what were we going to say?
Building, walking building? No, Shammai
Well, Shammai was essentially a snow shoveler before he became no, I'm sorry. Hillel was not snow shoveler. Hillel was a wood gatherer before he became Hillel. But that's when he was a student. But when they became professional scholars, what did they do? What was their role? What
Hillel
was
was
their
a
job?
liberal, Shammai was a strict constructionist.
But a liberal is not a profession.
They were teachers.
A liberal is an attitude.
Principals of the school.
They were co-principals of the yeshiva.
Yeah.
They were co-principals of the academy. Now, according to Gedalia Alon, there was actually a real division of labor. In effect, one is the Rosh. He said when you talk about the Zugot in the time of the early days of the Mishnah, the Zugot were divided up into two specific functions. One was there were pairs. If you look through the Mishnah and Avot, you've got Shmaya and Avtalyon and Yossi ben Yoezer and Yossi ben Yochanan, and it says that the Zugot decided the halacha. How did they decide halacha? They kind of subdivided the routine. One was the actual Rosh Yeshiva, and the other was the more public official. In other words, one spent his life teaching students, and the other one was more the outside person.
President of the school.
Exactly. One is the prime minister, one is the president. So this is the way it worked. He said that Hillel and Shammai, Hillel was the more public persona. Shammai was the guy who taught in the yeshiva. Now, it's almost embarrassingly stereotypic that the Rosh Yeshiva tends to be a much stricter person because he's dealing with pure reason, pure halacha, and the one who has the public role tends to be a little bit more liberal because he has to apply it to everyday life.
But they were in the same yeshiva.
But there weren't two. There weren't two separate schools. There weren't two separate yeshivot.
Oh, okay.
There was one institution
One institution.
that was
they
under
both
their
went there.
co-governance.
Okay. I always thought they were
No,
two, because they say
See,
Beit Hillel,
see
Beit
that?
Shammai.
There's a difference between Hillel and Shammai and Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. Hillel and Shammai were co-leaders.
In the same.
One focused on training students
Yeah.
to know the halacha, and the other focused on practical application of the halacha in everyday life.
Mhm.
So the distinction between the two is very clear. One has to be much more strict because he's talking about the pure halacha, and the other one has to be more liberal because you can't apply pure halacha to everyday life. If you do that, nobody would be able to survive. But they worked together. They were partners. But what happened, and this is the Gemara referring to the generations post Hillel and Shammai, it said in the generations post Hillel and Shammai, the students forgot. Each school focused on one aspect of their master. It was like the whole place broke apart. And you ended up having one school that says, we'll follow Shammai to the letter of the law, and we know that Shammai was always strict, therefore we will be always strict. And the other students said, well, Hillel was less strict, so we'll follow Hillel's approach.
And Shammai's students petered out eventually, or what?
Yes. Yes. Because you can't live a life of absolute restriction. And according to the Gemara, again, another embarrassing statement, there reached a point in the evolution of the school of Shammai and the school of Hillel where the two schools came to blows physically over a point of halacha, and not just, not just a brawl, but we're talking about outright murder, where the students of Shammai prevented the students of Hillel from coming into a deliberation, and they ended up fighting each other with spears and swords. Totally against what Hillel and Shammai themselves were doing. This is where the machloket l'shem shamayim becomes the machloket shelo l'shem shamayim, because there it's not a question of who's right, who's wrong, or what's the truth. There it's a question of power and victory. And on that day, both lost. that, by the way, is the, what is it, Tet B'Adar,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
That's the ninth of Adar,
Yeah.
which over the course of history had become, in many communities, a fast day. Because that was the day when the students of Shammai, the students of Hillel, perverted their master's teachings and turned it into a free-for-all brawl. For those of you who are familiar with, Pardes has started a new program a couple of years ago called the 9 Adar program,
Yes.
where they deal with not conflict resolution, because it's not an issue of conflict resolution, it's an issue of what they call constructive conflict, where people recognize that yes, it's important to have different opinions, but it's also important to learn to coexist with different opinions, so that even if we don't agree with each other, we can still agree to disagree. And by agreeing to disagree, we advance the cause of Torah much more so than by saying, you know, I'm better than you, I'm smarter than you, I'm stronger than you, and therefore my opinion should carry. And all throughout history, the approach to Judaism has been, let's argue, but let's leave the argument in the Beit Midrash when we leave the Beit Midrash. And that's the whole notion of learning b'chavruta, because learning b'chavruta means that it's not just me coming out with my dictation and my opinion which prevails over everybody, it's me listening to somebody else's opinion. And then the two of us forming some kind of an agreement with each other so that we can at least have a way to live together. My respecting you, you respecting me, and we'll leave it at that. So this is really what we're going to be talking about here, and how the Torah itself becomes the model for what is a machloket l'shem shamayim, and the different nuances of what is a machloket l'shem shamayim, which are found in the Torah. And I think in that regard, I definitely agree with what Rabbi Sachs is saying, that the Torah, this is the only piece of literature where the whole point of the Torah is to say, it's good to argue, it's good to have different opinions.
Yeah.
You need to have different opinions. Just make sure you don't turn this, this culture of argument into trying to be superior, trying to have a victory over somebody else. The culture of argument means that the argument should remain. And by keeping that argument going, you keep it alive, you keep the values of the argument alive. Not necessarily to say I'm better than you, because once Korach dies, the argument is over. Once Moshe dies, the argument is over. And what have you learned? Well, you've learned the wrong lesson. The wrong lesson is might makes right, and that's not what it's all about. It's about right makes right, you just have to find what the right is in this dispute. And that's really where we're headed. So that's basically what we're going to be doing over the course of time.